Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast episode. Today we have Shannon Algeo, and we're going to be talking about the power in your hands. He is publishing a book very soon. I highly recommend that you get it. It's going to be not only helpful to understand some of the aspects of digital minimalism, but also attachment with our phones, how we are creating certain connections with our devices that may not be as helpful to us. So we're going to have this conversation with him today, why he was inspired to write this book, and what are some of the biggest takeaways that you can take from this episode to maybe start replenishing and restructuring your life so that you can live more in the present and not through the algorithm. Shannon, thank you very much for being here on this podcast. Give us a little introduction. Who are you? Why should people read your book? And what is the power in your hands?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jose. It's a pleasure and honor to get to speak with you. And yeah, so I'm a psychotherapist with a background in yoga and meditation. So I have taught and continue to teach yoga and meditation for the last 15 years. And so really being in the experiential practice of connecting to the body and the body's natural wisdom and intelligence through the yoga practice has been my body of work that led me to become a therapist. And now I work with individuals and couples in therapy. And when you're in grad school, you learn about attachment theory. And attachment theory is this theory that as infants, we have a biological impulse to attach to our primary caregivers, which is an evolutionary impulse rooted in our survival. We need our caregivers. Humans are very vulnerable as babies and need a lot of care for many years in order to develop. And our brains continue to develop fully when we're 25 years old and then throughout our lives. So when we were learning about attachment theory and how we attach to certain devices or when we attach to certain people or relationships, I was thinking, I am attached to my device. I feel like I'm in an attachment relationship, that this smartphone is a primary caregiver that kind of spends time with me in the morning to get me up and get me stimulated throughout my day. And then to also help me relax at night and scroll and kind of numb out. And I go to it when I feel anxious. I go to it when I don't want to feel an emotion and I avoid my emotions. And so I started to get curious about wait, is this a thing? Is it possible that I actually am in an attachment relationship with my phone? And that's when I started to look at the existing research that links insecure attachment styles like anxious or avoidant or disorganized, which we can talk more about, with compulsive or problematic smartphone use. That actually, if you've had developmental trauma, that can be big T trauma or little t trauma, meaning something kind of smaller, but left a relational rupture in your psyche. If you've had relationship stress, if you've had a relationship rupture in your life, you are more vulnerable to develop a compulsive or problematic relationship with your phone. And there's actually attachment researchers who look at all addictions as actually misguided attempts to meet attachment related needs. We all have a need to feel safe, soothed, seen, and secure. And now that we have these technologies of our smartphones, we are attempting to feel safe and seen and soothed and secure through the device more than we are reaching for relationships. And so that was sort of the beginning, and the premise of me exploring my attachment to my phone and how it's impacting my life and the lives of so many millions of people.
You had an anecdote in your book that essentially talks about your work with teenagers and how just asking them to put away the phone was very difficult for them. I don't think this is only something that happens with teenagers, it's something that happens with adults as well. Even when you are in a social situation, a lot of people have difficulty saying no to the overstimulating device. Walk us through that experience. What have you learned from teenagers and other counseling groups that you have had experiences with? Why is it so hard to let go? And how can we start beating that mechanism to recover more of that human touch?
Yeah, what a great question. Yeah, when I was working at a public high school as a mental health therapist, I was providing therapy in the high school. And for the first time in my career, I was interacting with clients who were on their phone in session. Usually, when you work with an adult, they are, showing up for their therapy session and they're mostly wanting to participate in therapy. But, being a telehealth therapist who's provided therapy online for the last 6 years, I've also seen adults struggle with notifications or pop ups on their computer, emails coming through during session, all which can impact the quality of therapy because it's interrupting a client's attention. And therapy is about placing your attention on yourself and your inner world and your relationships and really tending to the internal environment and the relational environment around you. So we can see how technology is intercepting even a process of something like therapy that's meant to be reflective and insightful and introspective and embodied. In the high school, I was amazed because my clients were I was noticing and hearing from other colleagues working with their clients, youth clients, that these teens were merging with their devices. And a part of the therapy for some clients, they would want to show me videos on TikTok or YouTube. They would want to show me what they're interested in. And so as a therapist, I had to kind of walk this line of like, okay, this is a new client. So I'm building rapport with them. I don't want to shut this down. I don't want to completely I obviously don't want to come from a shaming or judgmental approach and then lose this opportunity to connect. And so I had to kind of navigate, okay, how is looking at this video a way of getting to know this client's psyche, the way that they think, what they might be feeling? And then at what point is this device preventing the relational connection of the therapeutic alliance, which is the connection between therapist and client, which, by the way, research shows that the highest predictor of successful outcomes in psychotherapy is the relationship between the therapist and the client. So if you're in therapy, how you feel about your therapist and the quality of that relationship is the most important thing about the therapeutic process. And so what does it mean to have this third entity, this third distraction in the therapeutic room? I really saw this, Jose, come up when I did a group and all of the members of the therapy group were on their phone. And that's when I realized that there was going to be no group therapy, no relational connection, no depth work possible with a room of teens on their phones. And so I got a board game box and I put my phone in the box and I said, everyone, put your phones in this box. No, Shannon, no, no, no. We don't want to put our phones in the box. No, no, no. My mom might be texting me. My mom's going to text me. You can, my mom's going to be so scared if I don't text her back right away. And I said, this is 45 minutes. Put your phone in the box. You will get it back in now 40 minutes and everything's going to be okay. And I had to really assert that boundary. And I watched over the coming hours and weeks the conversations and the connections between the members of the group really deepened and became much richer, and more eye contact was being made, more conversation about different things happening in the room. It was just a totally different environment for social connection, which adolescence is about: forming social connections and having conflict and friction and having boundaries tested. And if you hand teens phones, these young developing minds phones, we are intercepting these essential moments of socialization that should be happening in the schoolhouse.
Do you think this is also happening in adulthood? It's not limited to teens alone, right? When it comes to the socialization portion and how we are becoming even more separated in our opinions and our silos. Do you think this is the reason why our society is fractured? The lack of socialization because now we're on our phones?
Oh my gosh. I mean, yes. Totally. I do. It's the our brains continue to be neuroplastic throughout our lives. And the habits that we repeat become neural networks that get activated. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So shaping our brains is an embodied action. So if you get up from bed in the morning and the first thing you do is reach for your phone, and then you get up the next morning and your first impulse, or you're compelled, it's a compulsive action to reach for the phone. That is a habit of mind training that lives in the body. It's an embodied action that reaches for that phone. And so, the research that I have done and looked at shows that the average smartphone user, you probably know this, spends the equivalent of 61 to 80 days per year tethered to their device. If you get a phone at 13 years old and you die at 77, the average American lifespan, then you will spend 12.72 years on your phone. And that to me is like whoa, just it kind of gives me chills every time I really feel the power of that loss of time and loss of presence and loss of connection. And one way that this has shown up for me, Jose, is I notice when I spend more time on my phone, I become irritable in the physical world and in my community. So if I'm spending a lot of time tethered to technology and then I go to the grocery store, I notice I'm a little bit more annoyed by real people because it's like the real world is interrupting my digital life. Versus when I spend extended periods offline, I do these experiments of like 32 to 40 hours of just no technology. I am such a better citizen of the world. I'm more open. I smile more at a stranger. I take time to have that quote unquote inconvenient conversation with someone who I bump into on the street. And so I'm really amazed at how my social life is impacted by my digital life on the day to day, hour by hour level. And I think we need to just keep talking about this and bringing awareness to this because, as I'm sure you know, our technology use has become so normalized that it's this invisible societal addiction that a lot of people are waking up to, but so many of us can't see it because we're so stuck in it.
You said some words there, and that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. You said this is a societal problem, an addiction. I was actually surprised at how many times you mentioned that word in the book because nowadays we have this science wars. We have science wars in the same way that we had them about tobacco. So in the past, the tobacco industry commissioned studies to show that you couldn't get addicted from tobacco. And then there were other research papers that showcased, no, you can get addicted to tobacco. And there was this science war back and forth for many years that essentially said we have inconclusive evidence about whether this is an addiction or not. Eventually, society moved on and accepted that, yes, tobacco is an addictive substance. But we have this similar pattern right now happening for smartphones. There's a lot of papers that showcase that smartphones are addictive or they can be extremely dependent technology. And there's a lot of papers that say, no, it's not. We have inconclusive evidence, et cetera, et cetera. So I was surprised when you brought up a lot of terms from the psychology and kind of like world, like the DSM-5 and addiction and dependency, and you integrated all of that throughout the book. I really appreciated that. But I want to understand if in your framework, and we'll get to rituals, which I thought that was excellent part of your book. We'll get to that in just a second. But is this an actual addiction? What is the evidence from your perspective, someone who has been trained from a psychological perspective? Do we have evidence to truly say smartphones are addictive and they need to be treated in a similar way than other substances?
Yes, and such a great question. So internet addiction and the DSM has not yet integrated, to my knowledge, smartphone addiction or problematic smartphone use. However, smartphone addiction is seen as an internet addiction, and an internet addiction is looked at as a behavioral addiction. And behavioral addictions in the DSM, that's a diagnostic and statistical manual diagnosis of behavioral addiction, has a certain quality, like one of the definitions of it is a desire of the user to stop use with the inability to stop. So if I want to stop something and I can't, that is falling in the realm of a behavioral addiction. And I noticed that, I look to myself to notice what is happening in my body and yes, science is important and we should look at this research. And I also don't necessarily think we should or have time to wait for the war to be resolved to reckon with how it's impacting our lives right now. So I encourage everyone listening to check in with yourself and notice, do you have trouble getting off your phone despite wanting to get off your phone? And that for me is just such I think about the word compulsion. And Dr. David Greenfield, the psychologist or psychiatrist, has the smartphone compulsion test. It's 15 yes or no questions that can be really insightful about your relationship to your smartphone. And when I think about the word compulsion, I think about how I am compelled to reach. I am compelled to grab my device, to look at it, to get dopamine from seeing likes or emails or notifications or messages. And then I am with those intermittent rewards that I receive. Sometimes those likes are there, sometimes they're not there. I don't know what I'm going to get. There's this element of mystery if I'm going to get satisfied by checking the phone or if I'm going to feel empty and incomplete, like I didn't really get the hit. I didn't get the fix I was looking for. Those intermittent rewards, sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't, motivates me to check my phone more and enhances that compulsion. And so, one of my psychology professors who was my thesis advisor, who I mentioned in the book, Tom Stafora, he said to me in a private meeting, he was like, I don't need to look any further into my addiction or into whether I'm addicted to my phone or not. How do I know that I'm in an attachment relationship with it? If it disappears or it dies, I am emotionally responding. There is a charge in my body. I am not neutral to losing the phone or to it dying. And so that lets us know that we are in an attachment relationship, that and that's not a bad thing to be attached to something. But when that attachment is compensating for a deficit of human connection or a deficit of self-worth, a deficit of self-autonomy, then we're in this problematic dynamic where we're reaching outside of ourselves to feel complete, to feel whole, to feel soothed and regulated and at peace and okay. Okay, so maybe we could just say that is what it is. We're attached to our phones. What's the problem? Well, the companies that are benefiting from our attachment to their applications or from our attachment to their devices, there's an exploitative relationship there. The figure that we're attached to doesn't have our best interest at heart. There's actually a desire for them to keep our attention sustained as long as possible, which we know. So to go back to your question of is this an addiction? I think we have to look no further than our own experiences, and also know that from a psychological perspective and from the research that's been done for the last 15 years, there is a large consensus in the field of psychology that these applications and technologies are addictive, that uh, they've caused increased cases of anxiety, depression, various mental health symptoms, and suicidality in teens. And a lot of this is linked to the rise of the iPhone in 2007. And I'm not saying that this is all caused by phone use alone, but it is playing a massive role. I mean, you can't spend 2 to 3 months a year doing one particular type of activity and then say that activity is not impacting your life. And so the question becomes, how is it impacting your life? And is there a compulsion? Are you reaching for that device without even thinking about it? Or are you just genuinely intentional about your technology use and you don't have a problem?
Throughout your book, you put a few poems, and I really enjoy them because it's a good pause between all of the information that we got. There's a lot of information in your book. And I think something that people do want to know is, okay, I do have an attachment style. Maybe I'm anxious or I am secure. And could it be that even secure people have dependencies on this? And how do we move through that from maybe I'm anxious, but I don't want to be anxious and I want to be secure? Or maybe I'm secure with my personal relationships with my parents and my spouse, but maybe I'm anxious in my relationship with my phone. How is this variance affecting people? And is there a world where we can achieve perfect, secure attachment in all of our relationships?
I mean, I love to imagine that world. And one of the things I learned about attachment in as I studied it, and I've also explored it in myself, is that our Western minds are so individualistically oriented that we think of attachment like a personal diagnosis or an astrological sign, or like a specific thing to you. And in some ways it's like attachment is experienced by me. However, attachment is a relational system. It's a dynamic system that gets activated between two people. And in this case, also between a person and a device. And so the nature of how an attachment is formed really depends on the attachment systems of both people. So one way that this has shown up in my life is I might be feeling secure in one relational dynamic, but then let's say someone who's experienced a lot of trauma and has some intense coping strategies that come up around avoidance, and I'm in a significant or meaningful relationship with that person, I might start to really feel my anxious attachment enhanced by that dynamic between the two of us. So I think, the way that I think about secure attachment. So secure means that we developed, and this starts in our youth with our caregivers, we developed a good enough experience, meaning enough times. And research shows that you only need a little bit more than 50% of soothing and mirroring and caring like emotional response from your parent or your caregiver in order to develop a sense of secure. So just to take this back for a second, when we're young, we need our caregiver to model a sense of peace to us, because we, as a baby or a toddler, I might get dysregulated and I don't know how to soothe myself. And so if a caregiver enough times, like good enough, doesn't have to be perfect, if they soothe this young child and say, you're okay, it's going to be okay, and they help to regulate the nervous system of the child, then over time, the child will develop an internal sense of security and an ability to self-soothe when that parent or caregiver is not around. And so throughout life, depending on how that goes, we might start to feel anxious and preoccupied if a parent sometimes was there, but then there were a whole other number of important moments where I needed care and I needed to know that things were going to be okay and they weren't there, then I might get kind of like anxious, like, wait, is love going to be there or is love not going to be there? I don't know. So I'm going to pursue, making sure it's going to be there. I'm going to kind of obsess over it and get fixated on it so that I can make sure that I feel safe. If on the other hand, maybe there was like a really overbearing parent or really critical or kind of on top of a child, they might be like, oh my gosh, there's so much criticism coming towards me. I'm going to shrink and avoid and withdraw in order to protect myself and feel safe. And so we can see how this plays out in different relationships in different ways, is like essentially what I'm trying to say. And when it comes to our phones, I think this technology use lacks facial expression, tone of voice, and body language. If we're texting with someone, and I know so many people who've gotten into like charged, intense text back and forths, with someone that they care about, and they're essentially having an important conversation or even a fight over text, that is missing so many of the important social and emotional cues of humanity: tone of voice, body language, facial expression. And essentially, that's creating this experience of dysregulation through the device as a surrogate. So the device is becoming the intermediary for that conversation to happen. But the conversation isn't actually happening in a real and embodied way. And so, from an attachment perspective, there's no mirroring, there's no witnessing, there's no seeing, there's no soothing. There's just kind of yelling into a void of a text message or DM thread. So, that isn't going to help us move towards secure relating. That's actually going to enhance and entrench pre existing insecure dynamics like anxious preoccupation or avoidance, which the phone really allows for this avoidance, because I can say something via text, but I'm actually hiding behind the device and not really engaging in the human exchange. So I think I'm giving a really long-winded answer here, Jose, but there's this dynamic of attachment that really depends on every relationship and every moment, and also the medium through which we are facilitating that relationship.
As I listened to you, the thing that kept going through my head is that this is a collective issue and it's not just an individual issue. And as a result, we need a collective solution. But so many people are uncomfortable with being face to face once again, being embodied in a social environment. We fantasize, maybe idealize these places, the third spaces that we used to have, returning to those and engaging with them. But when we get there, we're uncomfortable because everything has been curated through the algorithm in our phones for us. And instead, now we have to embrace the friction of somebody else's opinion, somebody else's maybe way that they look at us, maybe a challenge, may arise in this environment, right? So I think that as I listen to you, that's the first thing that came to my mind. You're pointing out that we usually think of this problem as a individual problem and find or try to find individual solutions, but it goes beyond into needing to embody these conversations in person, but we don't want to do that because it's uncomfortable and it's not convenient.
Absolutely. Yes.
Um, yeah, for sure, for sure. I want to move now as we start getting into the later portion and final portion of our podcast to, okay, I understand, we have been talking about attachment theory, how people engage, how people are going through all of these issues. What can I do? If people are not going to show up in my environment, if people are not going to be with me and relate, what are some of the things that I can do starting from the individual to maybe help myself to learn this new style of attachment to people and to my devices in a way that is beneficial for me, but also what can I do in a collective sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the thing is that you don't need to have an insecure attachment style to have a compulsive or addictive relationship with your phone. It's like we're all impacted by this. And the attachment inquiry for me just deepens beneath just the behavioral addiction and helps me see the deeper patterns of what I'm trying to fill, the void that I'm trying to fill through the phone based life. And yeah, so how do we move from that into a new embodied experience of being in our built lives and the built world, the natural world? And I I think that study and learning and education are so important for our minds to wrap our heads around the nature of this problem. I do think there's a degree to which having some information, some science, some research emboldens us to understand what is happening to us, between us, and within us. And yet, I know very well myself that knowing information is not enough. It's not enough to know. I must practice and experiment and do. Like you, Jose, who's been on the light phone for 7 years. Talk about an experiment. That's beyond an experiment. That is a way of being and a lifestyle and a moral and ethical choice that you've made. And I've joined you since November. I'm also on the light phone, and I think so. So how do we take action together? And this is really what I'm obsessed with, uh, supporting people with and doing myself. Is Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Anxious Generation, says when you have a collective action problem, which is what we have because we're so many of us, most of us are on our phones and tethered to technology. A collective action problem requires collective action. So we must move together. We can do experiments, of course, in our own lives with our own devices, and we must. And how can we do this in relationship with other people so that we aren't fighting a tsunami as a single person trying to solve this massive problem? And so, how, like, if it's your family, maybe there's a 40-hour detox that you do where everyone goes offline together and there's just no technology in the house for a set period of time. Also, for me, getting out into the natural world. I have the privilege of living in a really beautiful place in Southern California called Ojai, and there's so many trails and river bottoms and amazing places. But if you don't live in a really like kind of natural environment, a lot of cities have incredibly beautiful parks and green spaces. And I love getting familiar with a place or a trail or a hike or a park, and then starting to build a practice of going to that land, going to that place without technology and being with my body and being with the built environment. And I mean, when I go on a hike with my phone, it is a very different experience. I'm like texting people, I'm leaving little voice memos, But when I go without my phone, I am just there in a real relationship and an exchange with the natural world. And so, what are these tiny practices of rehumanization and of rewiring our neuropsychology so that we can remember? And that's what the second section of the book is practices of remembering. In section 1, we reckon, and in section 2, we remember, which are just these like little uh, but significant shifts in experimentation that can help us remember that for our brains have been developing for up to 2 million years. Our ancestors knew how to get around without a phone. Our ancestors knew how to communicate with one another and resolve conflict. Our ancestors knew how to come together and band together to protect a community in need, to ensure shelter and food. There is an ancestral wisdom that lives in our bodies. And yet from the last 15, 20 years, we've all been indoctrinated into the cult of digitization, so much so that we can't even imagine our lives without these technologies. And I think so passionately that human intelligence is the conversation we need to be having. HI has gotten us here, and HI will get us home. And if we devalue our own human wisdom, then I think we're just kind of rolling over and surrendering to the rise of AI and the tech companies' agendas.
For sure. I love that in your book, you spend a decent chunk of time in the reckoning portion, understanding why things happen. And then you move towards remembering what we have done as human beings. But it is the rewiring section where it gets tricky for a lot of people, right? Where people start saying, like, well, that may work for you, Shannon. You may be able to have a Light Phone 3. You're a famous book publisher and you're going to sell millions of books and copies and you're going to be on the New York Times bestseller list, right? So that works for you, but it doesn't work for me. I have work. I think often of professions or realities of people who depend on smartphones as their medium for earning money. For example, Uber drivers, DoorDash. And I've been there. I've done that before when I was a student in graduate school. I did DoorDash, and I needed a smartphone in order to be able to deliver and, have all of these things. So what about all of this strata of, our society? Can everybody go with a dumb phone, or can I remain on the smartphone because I need it for work without having the addictive portions of it? This is where people enter the chat and maybe the comment section of this podcast and say something along the lines of, it's a willpower problem, or just delete the social media apps. Are those actually going to get us to rewiring? What's your argument? And if that's not sufficient, what would be sufficient?
Yes, it's such a great question. And I know this well. I was a Lyft driver when I first moved to Los Angeles. I've done that as well. I also, as a psychotherapist, need to make sure I'm available to some degree to my clients in case there's an emergency or an urgent need between sessions, and use my phone and technology for a bunch of other purposes. So your question is really valid, and I'm so glad that you asked it, because I have seen that argument that there's like this like classist thing now with the dumb phone, is that you have to have a certain amount of privilege to have a dumb phone, which is a valid argument, and it's also one worth questioning at the same time. Like, is that true? And I think that having a dumb phone is definitely not the only way to set boundaries with your relationship with technology and with your smartphone. And I know this because when I was in Europe, I couldn't use the light phone actually. And so I had my iPhone 16 Pro Max. I always like to say it like that because it has such bro language. The 16 Pro Max. And that's the phone that I was using when I was in Europe. writing the book. And I needed it because I didn't know where I was when I was like in the Netherlands. I had to get around. I really needed the GPS. And I needed to communicate with people on WhatsApp because I was abroad. Anyway, the thing that saved me was for my creative process. So if you're listening to this and you have something that you might want to create or something that you want to dedicate your time to, or you want to explore being offline, periods of time where we turn our phone off intentionally can be incredibly fruitful. So it's like, is there a period? It could be 8 hours, it could be 24 hours, it could be, 2 to 4 hours or even one. But is there a period where you can actually turn your phone off and put it in another room, put it in a drawer, put it face down, make a commitment? I also love, people talk about bricking their phones. I really enjoyed and benefited from the app One Sec, and I write about their strict block feature. And I on Instagram, TikTok, I think it was on a dating app, and my email, I had this strict block feature from like 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day. So that when I did look at my phone in the morning, when I was ready to look at it, or if I rolled over out of bed, and I don't sleep with my phone near my bed or even in the same room, but there are those moments where I look at my phone sooner in the day than I want to. And at least if I clicked those apps, I would be strict blocked, like no way. And using a feature like that, like if you work for Uber Eats or DoorDash or Lyft, you can not block those apps, but then you can block a bunch of other apps that you don't want to be on throughout your day. And I think thinking of this as an all or nothing problem can put us in a dangerous situation. I think about like my friends who have struggled with eating disorders, and I've joined them for 12-step meetings focused on eating disorders. One of the conundrums of an eating disorder is it's not like alcohol. You can't just completely give it up. You can't become completely sober from food. That would be severe anorexia. That is an eating disorder. So it's like with technology, we do live in a world now where we need, in most cases, to be technologically engaged in one way or another. Yesterday, I got a haircut, and the barber's payment processing was down. So I needed to go home and Venmo him from my computer. And because I couldn't do it on my light phone. So I still needed to engage to pay the barber, a simple exchange. And so I think it's important for us to think about what are the nuances of boundaries that we can set for ourselves within our days, and how do we make commitments that honor the lives that we want to be living, or the creative project that we want to be tending to, or the humans who we want to be present with. And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing game.
I appreciate you saying that. And I think a lot of people will find it helpful because I have been arguing lately. At first, I think I was very against the smartphone and, hey, you got to sacrifice everything, go the dumb phone life. But over time, we have come to the realization that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can use a smartphone mindfully and learn how to do it. And you also may need breaks to say, hey, you know what? I will use my smartphone for my 9 to 5. But then when I get home, I will switch to a dumb phone in order to have presence and in order to focus on my creative pursuits. So really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. And Jose, I just want to add one thing about this book. And when I wrote The Power in Your Hands, and something you spoke to just a bit earlier, is that I don't assert that what works for me is going to work for other people. And I hope that's clear in the book. It certainly was in my intention, but I wanted to model a messy process of trying something. And that is what I hope readers take away, is not that what I did is going to work for you, but by trying to do something, you can make your life better and reclaim your agency and your personal authority and creativity and life. And that's kind of like my hope for the book is like we all need to be doing a lot of messy experiments is essentially what I'm hoping for in this world.
That's very important and very true. Before I give you the final word, tell us a little bit more about where people can find the book, where can they pre-order it. You also have other pursuits, I would say. You have a retreat coming up very soon. Talk a little bit about that. How can people participate? Maybe learn more about the work that you're doing so that they can start their journey of experimentation and healing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jose. Here is the book for anyone. I don't know if anyone is watching us here, but there's The Power in Your Hands. Liberate Yourself from Attachment to Technology in hardcover. It officially publishes June 2nd or published on June 2nd if you're listening to this after that date. And yeah, it's available in hardcover everywhere books are sold. And I really, the three sections of the book, reckoning, remembering, and reclaiming, take us on a journey. And I really hope that it's of service to you listening to question what has become normalized about your relationship to technology and to remember that there are other ways of being alive and we can move toward collective action by demanding that we live our lives in different and embodied and human ways. And so yeah, everyone can get the book, shannonalgeo.com/book, or you can go search for The Power in Your Hands by Shannon Algeo. It's widely available. And yeah, this book actually, before I started writing it, I began leading 5-day offline retreats, which I really treat as these ritualistic ceremonies of going offline to be in nature, to be with an amazing community of people, and to be with the inquiry of how has technology use impacted my life and what is possible for my psyche, for my brain, for my body, for my connections. Excuse me, when I go offline. And so over the 5 days, we do this 70-hour or 72-hour ceremony, this ritual of putting our phones in boxes and tending to the anxiety that comes up or the excitement or the fear about going offline, doing the due diligence to communicate to people who we care about and love about our choice to go offline for a few days. And this began at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, an incredible place for emergent psychological work, humanistic work, embodied work. And so this year, I'll be leading this retreat in Ireland at the autumn equinox. We'll be doing an offline retreat in West Ireland. And then I'll also be doing a 5-day retreat in Stockbridge, Massachusetts at the Kripalu Center in October. That's in late October. And then we'll be back at Esalen in mid-December, like the 14th through the 18th, for another offline workshop at the Esalen Institute.
That's good to hear. And I hope that some people are able to join and enjoy that experience. I think, as I was perusing on the website, I saw a lot of things that you guys will do, especially in the Ireland one, which is wild Atlantic seaweed baths, which is definitely something different. But I think it's also just the experience of being in a collective environment that allows you to reconnect with people, with nature, and in a scenic environment as well. That helps our senses to create a better attachment. Well, Shannon, thank you very much. I'm going to give you the final word. Anything you want to say to our audience, and anything that you want for them to take home and maybe share with their friends.
Yeah, well, first, I just want to thank you, Jose, for hosting me and for your dedication to this conversation and all of your writing and interviews and this podcast. And I just think it's so incredibly important for people to be leading and demonstrating and embodying and living another way. And you're really providing so much valuable information and asking really important questions. And so thank you for hosting me on Moving Offline and for all the work that you're doing. And I really appreciate getting to connect with you here. And I would just say, I would leave the final word that we get on average 4,500 weeks, about 4,000 to 4,500 weeks to live, to be alive, if we're lucky. And there's such a rich opportunity of being alive. And that's what addiction does, is it gives us this hollow quick fix that makes us feel like we're getting something, even though it's empty and doesn't really satiate us. And by detoxifying and fasting or taking breaks or stepping away or rewiring and experimenting, we can remember the richness of the human experience. And I'm not here to say that it's all perfect and it's all going to feel great and we're not going to come up against uncomfortable emotions and challenges and a world that is in a lot of distress and need right now. But we can connect to the part of ourselves that can contribute to the solution. And we can feel a fullness of aliveness that is possible when we remember the inherent power of being human. And so I would just say, what is the next right action? I love the Buddhist concept of the next right action. You don't have to fix your whole relationship with your smartphone. You don't have to necessarily buy a light phone right now, although you can. But what is one thing you can do either today or in the next 2-3 days or next week to try something out for yourself and put this conversation into your body as an embodied experience? And if you can do one small action and identify what that next right action is, then you are beginning the snowball effect that is the momentum and the architecture of change. And I hope that for everyone, that we can remember what it's like to be offline.
That was our time with Shannon Algeo. If you want to check out the resources, the book, and other things that he's doing, make sure to check the links in the description of this podcast. I appreciate you not only listening to this podcast, but sharing it with others. If you have found it valuable and you think that other people need to listen to this, make sure to send it to them, nudge them to subscribe. And if you are so inclined to help us, you can also leave a review. It really helps the show. It's the free way to contribute so that more people can find it. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.